Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that probably touches a lot of people who have approached midlife. There might be a lot of experiences when it comes to something like this, and it's a very careful step that I take when we talk about this, and that is the death of a child. Many of us have probably felt or experienced, whether personally or through friends, something as devastating as losing a loved one at such a very young age. It may be a stillbirth or perhaps a young child in a car crash. Whatever the case is, there's nothing more devastating than an experience like this. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program is someone who's going to share with us through a wonderful book called I'm Not Dead, I'm Different, in which these young spirits on the other side of the world come over and tell us what this is and how they can share special messages about what it is to just keep holding on to life, living, and being happy. Hollister Rand is joining us here on the program. She is a clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient, which means that she can see, hear, and feel the presence of spirits as well as get the sense of their personalities, emotions, and physical attributes. Her unique gifts have provided comfort and closure for people all over the world. And I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Hollister Rand, to the Beyond 50 radio program. Hollister, how are you today?
Just great. I'm calling you from sunny Southern California, only it feels a little bit more like Portland. We're overcast here. Yeah, I went for my walk this morning, and I thought, well, look at this. Interesting that I'm calling up north today.
Yeah, and it's just as warm up here, too, as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I love talking about the great beyond on Beyond 50.
Well, it certainly is a fascinating subject, because when people are approaching midlife, the one thing that we experience that you don't when you're in your youth is time and its finality, and the curiosity, have we really lived? We start really thinking about our lives quite a bit, wondering, have we done everything that we've wanted to do? What are our regrets? What are the things we need to do so that we can find that we've actually fully lived, And so this is one of those interesting books for those who really probably didn't get out there and experience a lot of life like a lot of us have, but certainly, as you write in here so eloquently, it seems to us there's not a whole lot to worry about, is there?
Well, the good news is that deadlines are our friend. Whether they're here on the earth plane or the fact that we're facing that this earthly life will end as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
What I've discovered from Kids in Spirit is that anything we have not felt that we've accomplished here on this earth plane can be continued in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the greatest challenges for parents who have lost a child is they'll never grow up, they'll never marry, they won't graduate from high school, they won't go to college, I won't have grandchildren, all of those things. And although the spirits don't necessarily go through life as we do here, sort of sequentially, Kids in Spirit can keep pace with their peers and family members here on the earth plane. So I've had kids show themselves at various ages that they would have been had they lived here on this earth plane. So the good news is that the spirits are very flexible as far as age and that kind of thing. So I will often have someone who died at 100 come as though they were 30 and living at the height of their vitality.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm convinced I'm going to come back looking, when people come to visit me in the afterlife, I'm going to look like Heidi Klum.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So we don't have to worry about missing out. We really, really don't. The key, however, is to enthusiastically connect with the frequency of love with everything we do on this earth plane. If we do that, we're set.
Now, what's really fascinating about what your book talks about, I'm Not Dead, I'm Different, are sort of those, at times, hard-hitting questions about how we actually spend our lives. For instance, the one chapter that you deal with when it comes to addictions in life and death. And I was looking at that and I was thinking, okay, just recently we had Dr. Raymond Moody on the program.
Who I love. I did the Afterlife conference with Dr. Raymond Moody in Portland.
And, and it was fascinating, when you take a look at something like, for instance, the issue of suicide.
Right.
And to me, I thought there was a really poignant question that had to be asked, because there's a lot of beliefs about what allegedly happens to the soul from someone who takes their own life. And what I found fascinating in your book when I read about this is it really paralleled very accurately exactly the same thing that he said. And that is, when I asked the question, when it comes to suicide, have you ever, or in the research over the many years that you've been researching the near-death experience or the life-after-life experience, is that when somebody commits a suicide and they experience a near-death and they come back, what happens, versus somebody who makes the attempt but doesn't succeed? And he says the difference is this: the person that actually succeeds and has a near-death experience comes back and they never want to try that again.
Right.
Whereas a person who doesn't succeed does want to try again.
Right.
And in your book, it was fascinating to read. Now, these people succeeded, they crossed over the other side, and they came back, and they're telling people, look, don't feel guilty about what I've done, but what you need to do is you need to live. And that's, to me, it was just fascinating to read how similar that was.
Yes, absolutely. I've talked to in fact, I had a suicide in my own family, so someone very close to me, my cousin Tommy. So that, as I was writing that chapter, I found that I was crying on my keyboard. And this was years after his passing. So I thought, wow, this is still affecting me. One thing that people who take their own lives realize is how that act affects everyone they've left behind. Most people, when they're about to do this, have no idea how much they matter to other people. The pain often causes people to become so myopic that they only want to be out of the pain. So when they pass and some of that pain is gone, they then have the opportunity of experiencing the pain that they have created for other people. And I had one young man in spirit say to me that his mother's love, he explained he did not even have receptors for love here on this planet. People loved him, but for some reason he could not feel it. He couldn't accept it. And when he killed himself, he said his mother's love was like a gift that he brought with him to the afterlife and was finally able to open. So sometimes when people who have passed with suicide find themselves in this place of love, and they are able then to really feel it, it permeates everything that they are, they then will experience the pain that they've created in others by their act. And that's a very sobering thing. So yes, the message is live, 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 and live at the frequency of love.
See, and I think why that was important, I guess, to bring up first is the fact that we have such beliefs, especially around what almost seems to be the hardwired story of the Bible. That once we take this and we commit this act, that the soul somehow goes off and becomes destroyed somehow or, punished. And I actually have a friend of mine here in Portland, Oregon. She is also a clairvoyant, if you will, and like you, has these spirits that come around and give her messages. And I asked her that same question, what actually happens to someone who decides to do what is considered to be a very selfish act? And she says, there's a tremendous amount of sadness they feel, but they don't go off, they're not destroyed, they don't go into the darkness forever. That doesn't happen, And a lot of times what happens is that you go right back, from my understanding, and you got to try it again. You got to get in there and start living again.
Well, the good news is that we live here and we really live there. I mean, life is very immediate in the afterlife. Everything exists at the same time. And the idea of heaven is really interesting. I had one lady come to me and say to her daughter, I'm here in heaven. She was a very, very religious person. She said, I'm here in heaven. Then there was a pause, and she said, and they let anybody in here.
You got to like that.
Well, I just paused, and I just started laughing because the woman then went on to say, the daughter who was sitting with me, she said, oh, my mother was always worried that her brothers and sisters might not make it because they weren't as religious as she was. And so now she's surrounded by her family, so it's actually a pleasant surprise. Yeah, they let anybody in here. Mm-hmm. The good news is that people do change. People change in the afterlife as well. May not happen all at once, but it does. The reason I know this is I've been doing this work long enough that I am now speaking to my own clients who have passed. So I will have their families come to me. So I'm now talking to clients who have been mine, coming to see me for 20 years or so. They pass and they start talking to their own families about what life is like on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Now, you wrote this predominantly talking about children who have passed. Why was that?
Because HarperCollins asked me to. That's why.
I guess that makes it a nice direct answer to a question.
Yeah, no, but it's really true. I mean, I really have a broad, I'm an equal opportunity spirit communicator.
I figured as much.
Yeah, I love talking with pets in spirit as well. Animals have a lot to say. Let me tell you, they'll communicate with you while they're here, but in the afterlife, they've got a lot to say because then they can put words to everything that they have to say. So, yes, I'll speak with animals in spirit, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers. As the kids have showed me, everybody will lose someone they love at some point in time. That's just the nature of life. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I think HarperCollins wanted me to write this particular book is because it's highlighted when a young person leaves the planet. Mm-hmm. Every question that we have, there's a trauma, because we have this belief that the young don't die before the old, that children don't die before their parents. Well, I don't know who made up that rule, because until very recently, infant mortality was extraordinarily high and still is in different places around the world. I mean, people used to have large families in large part, well, there wasn't birth control, but in large part because so many children died. Mm-hmm. So this is really sort of a new belief, and I've had the kids, sort of look at me, scratch their heads going, well, they don't even understand why it is such a big deal. Kids are really matter-of-fact about life, death, and life. I had one young person come to me, and he died by being hit in the head with a hammer. Now, to me, that's kind of a very peculiar way to die. So I go right into reporter mode. How did that happen? Did the hammer fall off a building? Did someone hit you in the head? Do we have a murder? Of course, I'm like, what? What is this all about? He cut me off and basically said, that's just how I got here. As matter of fact as you can be, we are the people here on this earth plane who have issues around death and dying. The spirits do not. And that's why I divided the book up into every possible way people can die. Mm-hmm. Because that's often where our lives stop, is at the moment that person dies. Our lives change. Our lives stop. We create stories around what it means that this person has passed. And the one thing, let's take suicides, for instance. The one thing that someone who has passed with suicide can offer us is connection. Their passing is very much sort of the period to the end of the communication of the sentence of their life. It's like, well, gee, there's nothing to say after that, especially when someone takes their own life without leaving any sort of note. There's no explanation. And you're left with, what? They often will not explain their deaths. As one young man in spirit said to me, would there be any reason good enough? That's what he said to his mother when she asked, why did you do this? Mm-hmm. There would not be any reason good enough. But what the spirits offer us is not necessarily an explanation of their death, the why, the how, why did it have to happen then? What was the reason? They may not offer us explanations, but they do offer us connection. And that's what the young man who said, I'm not dead, I'm different, that's what he was offering his family who was so devastated. His father said, he's dead and gone. And the kid says, I'm not dead and gone, I'm different.
Mm-hmm.
So what the spirits call us to is a different way of continuing our relationship. That's really what this is all about. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I'm a medium.
Mm-hmm. Now, there was a story that you shared in your book about a lady where generally when you work with people, you'll tend to record sessions with them where she actually had you stop recording. Tell us about that.
Yes. That's really unusual because everybody wants to record the
Right.
sessions because they want to remember
Is this
everything.
for real?
So
Am I nuts? Or did this really happen?
That's really interesting. Well, it was because she had an abortion that her husband did not know about.
Right.
And and this baby showed up. Now, the way that, first of all, I need to clarify something. Children who pass with abortion or miscarriage or stillborn don't necessarily remain babies in the afterlife. It's not about that. There aren't like little cherub babies floating around, with wings on. They come to me as little spirit lights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I know that they were children who did not make it here one way or another. And they will often stay with the family. So aborted children will rarely give me specific information about themselves, mostly because the sitter can't confirm any of that. And the work that I do, validation is very important because that speaks to the evidential proof of life after death. So I could say anything to anyone, about an aborted baby. What they will talk about, however, are the circumstances around the situation which caused their passing. And that is very often what the mother can relate to. So they'll give very specific information so that the mother knows, yes, this baby absolutely saw what was going on. Now, the other thing is there are no victims here. So that baby came, or that spirit, I hesitate to even say baby, but that spirit aligned itself with this mother with the full understanding that being born is a dicey business.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
And knew what the circumstances were. And very often, these spirits will continue to align themselves with the mothers. So if there's been a miscarriage, that spirit will continue to align itself with the mother. If there's been an abortion, the same thing happens. And these spirits will often serve as our joy guides and will give us, childlike joy in our lives in, sort of unimaginable ways. I kind of look at abortion and miscarriage as flip sides of the same coin, with miscarriage being the spirit's decision not to go forward with an incarnation, and abortion being the mother's decision not to go forward with the contract of a joined life here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the spirits are pretty matter-of-fact about that.
You reminded me, Hollister, of an episode of L.A. Law.
Oh, boy.
And it was fascinating because...
that sound.
No, it was actually interesting because of what you were talking about. It reminded me of an episode, because you said...
Oh, L.A. Law, not Law and Order.
No, not Law and Order. I don't watch that stuff. No, this was L.A. Law back in the day, 1980s. But anyway... what it was is you were talking about, this idea of birth is a dicey business at best, that there's no guarantees. And that was exactly what was happening in this episode where there was a doctor that was, working with this lady and trying his best through surgery to be sure that she could maintain her pregnancy. But apparently things just didn't work out, and she ended up having a miscarriage and was suing the doctor for malpractice. And, and there he is on the stand, he's given his testimony, and he simply says, look, you guys act as though there's guarantees once you're in my hands. He says, I did everything I could possibly do, and here was this lady sitting there, and she finally realized after just listening to him that, maybe I've overstepped myself here, that I had expected too much from you. And I thought to myself, in situations like that where children die perhaps on the operating table and there isn't that closure from, let's say, a parent, what happens there? Have you had experiences like that with the afterlife where they come back and they say, look, lay off. It wasn't like that at all. That this was possibly my decision, that I knew this was my time to just move on.
The spirits are always correcting us, by the way. They're always correcting our versions of their death. Always. In fact, it's rare that a day goes by with a group of sessions or a large group where some spirit doesn't come through and reframe the way someone is looking at their passing. And very often what they do is they will not join in the blame game. They just won't. Mm-hmm. So I find it they talk about justice. So here it's not just about the dying on an operating table. I mean, in my book, I talk about kids who were murdered. Mm-hmm. And one young man who just before he was killed by, people shooting, it was kind of a drive-by thing, he turned and shielded the girl he was with. And he died and she did not. And all he said was he died the way he lived. He was someone who loved and protected people. I had a very young widow. I think her husband was killed. He was probably under 30. And he was killed by someone in his own driveway. And this was a friend of his for years who had all sorts of struggles with addictions and drinking and, may have even had some mental illness going on. And this young man was killed by his best friend in his own driveway. And the wife was caught up in how wrong this all was and how this guy got off. He didn't, he got basically a slap on the wrist. And what her husband said to her was, I signed on to rescue people. Turns out he was a fireman. Mm-hmm. He said, every day I got up and went to work, I knew that I could lose my life trying to save someone else's. And he said, just because my driveway wasn't a burning building doesn't mean that I didn't lose my life trying to rescue someone else. Mm-hmm. So they will reframe how we view their lives and their deaths. Mm-hmm. One woman came to see me, and her father had killed himself, and she said to me, when he killed himself, he killed me too. And the father came back and said, you don't own my death. I thought, well, now that's an interesting response. So she was making his choice her own, mm-hmm. and owning his death and making it her own. The spirits really want to disengage us from the stories that we tell ourselves about how they died.
It seems more and more that we're beginning to realize the idea of reincarnation is very possible or very real. That's what you discovered as you were putting this book together, and I'm sure in your work over the years.
Yes, I have. I don't consider myself a regressionist or anything like that, but I do find that the spirits will mention reincarnation, but not necessarily come as they were in a former life or let me know where they may go in a future life. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. When they do give me any information about a past life, it's often related to the person I'm sitting with. I had a father come through talk to his son about a life that they shared in Germany and how they were clockmakers and gave the area of Germany where this was and all of these details. And the guy kept getting more white and more white as I was talking with him. I thought he was going to pass out. And he finally said, I just got back from Germany. I went to this town. I felt guided. I got there. I felt like I belonged. I walked down the streets, and I knew where everything was. And he said, I went into a clock shop, just as you described, and I felt so at home there and had to buy a clock and bring it home. Mm. So that was a very specific thing that he and his father shared, a past life. That doesn't normally happen. Mm-hmm. One thing I've discovered, too, is that here in the West, we're a little bit slow on the reincarnation uptake. So when we pass here, very often the spirits will say, I will wait for you. I hear that a lot in the United States. So it seems as though we come back in groups, we wait for each other. There's a sense of being reunited again. When I communicate, however, with clients in Thailand, India, other places in the East, some of my Chinese clients, things like that, people just get right on that reincarnation train. So it's almost as though the families expect someone to pass and come right back in the family. Mm-hmm. And I don't think they disappoint. Mm-hmm. So I find that depending on where I'm speaking with people in the world and what their beliefs are, it can be different. So it's not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. I like that story that you share about a lady who ended up having 3 ex-husbands show up.
Well, one of the things
and
I
what
really
was funny
love,
about that is how he says, you told me to go to hell lots of times, but I ended up going to heaven.
That's right. Well, I really love it when a husband comes in spirit and refers to himself as a husband, and the wife looks at me and goes, oh, no, he's an ex. I explained to her, he doesn't come as an ex. He comes as a husband. Very often, the spirits will come as the main connection. They'll come as a mother, not a stepmother. They'll come as, yesterday I had a lady who had 2 mothers. I said, you have 2 mothers. And she said, well, yes, I do. I said, well, they're talking about adoptions in this family. She said, yes, I was adopted. Now, at the time I was speaking with her, I was talking with her biological mother, whom she knew, who passed last year. Mm-hmm. So she had 2 mothers. I've spoken with people with multiple husbands, and the interesting thing is they were all getting along. Now, in that lady's case, these guys happen to all be friends. So they even knew each other here on this earth plane. So then you got to think, wow, that's really interesting. One friend dies, you just take up with the next. But, besides that, they were all there together. They knew each other. They were happy, and they loved her, and so they were there for her, guiding her in her life. So I have not come across jealous ex-husbands in the afterlife. I just have not. So, but on the flip side, we do not have to be with people we choose not to be with. That's the other thing. Mm-hmm. So in a session with a lady by phone, 2 children showed up for her, 2 sons. And they let me know that someone very close to them in the family had taken their lives and then killed himself. And that they were not able to see him. They did not see him. They have not seen him in the afterlife. So there was some division between them. Now, the interesting thing is the person who committed this act, his family came through with a big banner, and they wrote sorry on it. And so I don't know whether it was his mother, I can't remember, but his relatives came through, and it turns out it was her husband. He had killed his 2 sons and then killed himself. So the children did not see him for whatever reason, but they did have access to his family, and they were connected in some way. So there is some level of protection as well until people either come to terms with what they've done and all of that kind of thing.
Hollister, you bring up to me something that really is becoming a disturbing almost trend here in America, and that is gun deaths in schools. Tell us what your experience, if in fact you've had those, with something like that.
I'm trying to think. I've had experience with multiple deaths, where, in fact, I just wrote an article for I send out a free email newsletter every month, and people can sign up for that on my website, hollisterrand.com. And I write articles about all of these subjects, the things that are happening in the world. And I talked about group passings. And the ones that I've worked with primarily are 9/11, explosions around the world, where people are sitting at cafes and whole families blow up, or they're, that kind of thing. So I've worked, and the Holocaust people. I've worked with groups who have had entire families lost in Holocaust and other genocide situations. So although I haven't connected with what's going on here, there are enough similarities that the spirits speak to this, and there's always an opportunity here for spirits to make a sacrifice for the greatest good, and they'll do that. Mm-hmm. We don't fully understand because our brains and our minds and our hearts are so limited here on the earth plane. We can't conceive how a tragedy here can be part of a bigger plan, but it often is. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've learned from kids in spirit is their deaths will inspire people to change the world, and that's what they do. And they work from their side to help bring those changes. So we have Amber Alerts. We have people setting up foundations. So this young mother who lost her soon-to-be ex-husband and her 2 children, a foundation was created to promote nonviolence, and particularly gun violence. So I think that will also help with all the school shootings and things like that. But these children and these spirits continue to work with us on this side. So they don't disappear, and not remain connected and working toward the solution of all of these problems. They do. So when someone creates a foundation, they have spirits on the board of these organizations. So these kids and anybody, whether it's cancer research, all of those things, these spirits are on the boards of these organizations, guiding and inspiring.
I had some time ago a conversation that I felt was just one of the most unique conversations that I had, even though it was brief.
I'm sure you've had a lot of unique conversations.
I have, but in the context of what we're talking about here, certainly. And that is, it was a gentleman. I was talking with him and his wife. I was in a restaurant, and we came to know each other quickly. And it was interesting because his job is that he was a trauma pediatrician. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And it was interesting. He says, I think the toughest part of my job is when I meet parents for the first time, and I have to tell them that your child has died, in surgery. I just couldn't save them, and that's got to be very difficult, and you can just imagine what the parents must be thinking. And you think to yourself, but, he seemed to be so light about it. He says, there is nothing in this world I would rather be doing than what I am doing now. And I thought, when something like that happens, when you have to go to a parent or parents and say, this just didn't happen, and I'm sorry, especially for the first time you meet these people, you have to think, what brings you such tremendous fulfillment when you know that you can't be successful all the time? And he says it's knowing that there is a lot more beyond life. And it kind of really intrigued me to hear him say something like this. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Well, I once had a father who lost his daughter to an eating disorder, and he was absolutely devastated. They just couldn't save her. And he looked at me and he said, how is it that you can do this every day? How can you sit here and talk with grieving people every single day? And I said, it's very simple. The answer is hope. The spirits, especially the children in spirit, they are all about hope, life, and love. They know that there is something beyond this life. And they're very engaged. In fact, children are often engaged with the life beyond this one, even while they're here. So young children are seeing spirits. I'm having parents contacting me, what do I do with my child who, is seeing my mother who passed, and is dancing and talking with spirits? Children are very connected to the afterlife. So for them, a passing with surgery, a, quote, trauma, all of that kind of thing is like, well, okay, they're almost not that connected here to this earth. In my book, I talk about seeing a toddler in hand with a grandfather or a great-grandfather, and they were both sort of walking exactly the same. Neither of them was very sure on their feet. I thought, boy, they're both going down. And I realized, here's the toddler learning how to walk, and here's the grandfather learning how to unwalk. One getting used to leaving the spirit world and being physical, and the other one getting used to leaving the physical world and adapting to the spirit world. We're always in this state of transition, and kids know it better than anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the hope. The hope is that this is actually kind of a short, limited part of our lives and our existence, is this physical plane.
I know that I still have a sketch or drawing that my daughter had done. She was probably about 7 years old, and it was at a time that my own son was actually in intensive care. And it was really fascinating because there was a lot of uncertainty at that time. And she drew these two large angels, and then she drew this face that was bearded, and then she drew sort of a heart within a heart within a heart. And it was really a time of tremendous uncertainty about how this would all come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, what's this all about, And she says, well, it's where Dustin is right now. And I was really kind of taken aback by that, and I had to ask her. And it was, looking back on this question that day, I was really surprised that I had asked that. But I suppose parents have a knowing when a situation such as that is there in front of them. And that simply was, do you think Dustin is going to live?
Mm-hmm.
I was, to this day, I even look back and think, wow, how did I ask a question like that? And she just kind of looked up and matter-of-factly smiled and says, oh, yeah. And then I had to ask, well, how can you be so sure?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, because God told me.
Mm-hmm.
And what else could I say? And I still have that drawing.
Well,
even my daughter was intrigued to this day that I still have that drawing,
mm-hmm.
Because there was a point after that I was really so emotionally taken aback. She thought that I didn't like the drawing, so she started scribbling on it. And I said, no, stop, And so, of course, I put it away. And she thought that I didn't like the drawing, and I said, no, it had nothing to do with that.
Right.
I was just overwhelmed by what you had just told me,
Well,
But I found myself being the child and she was the adult in that particular moment.
This is why HarperCollins wanted me to write this book. Because, in essence, who is better to teach us about death and life after death than the children? The Bible says, and a child shall lead them. Well, this is absolutely what's happening. Kids are as matter-of-fact about death as anybody. And that's one of the things I love about them when I speak with them in the afterlife. They're matter-of-fact about life, death, who they love. They're enthusiastic. They want to make connection. They use technology here on the earth plane to let us know they're around. They influence the natural world. I mean, it's a thrill working with the young in the afterlife for me. I just love it. I have a great time.
Well, I can imagine you would.
Yeah, I mean, they're always doing something fun. And, I have rules with connecting with spirits. And rules like you stand here so I know what side of the family you're on, all ways that make communication easy for me. Well, the kids very often just throw those rules right out the window. So I almost always know when when a child's showing up, when someone's running around the room as fast as they can go. I'm like, wow, okay, we've got a kid here. Because they just don't stand still.
Rules can be very important for guidance, but as people begin to read or read through the book, I'm Not Dead, I'm Different, they'll come to understand that, why are you adults so caught up in rules?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really got a kick out of that, especially when I was reading in one chapter about one who had 4 fathers.
Right. That experience was really something for me. I think that's from the chapter Bloodlines.
Right.
Who's your daddy? Who's your daddy? When bloodlines matter and when they don't, or something like that. And the interesting thing about adoption and love and how we recreate families and we create families and how important all of these networks are in our lives. And that's really the thing is we are connected in a network. Here on this earth plane, we can easily connect to the network of all of those who have passed before us. I will have someone come to see me, and I'll say, I have this person, that person, I've got Joe, I've got Tony, and they're mentioning an Adelaide, and who the heck is Gloria? And the woman will say, well, Tony never knew Gloria. Why would he be bringing her up? And I said, well, because Gloria is in your network. You are the central person here. So everybody who knows you knows each other. I call it the family. Verizon or one of these service providers for phones, for cell phones, came up with family. And that's really what it is. We are in these networks of family. And so you have friends, you have family, and we're all connected. And so everybody we know is connected at some level. And so in the afterlife, energetically, they all know each other as well. Mm-hmm. It's a huge kaleidoscope and a tapestry.
Mm-hmm. I always find it fascinating, too, Hollister, at all the movies that are out there that deal with the afterlife. And just recently, I found myself drawn to a movie very enjoyable, which was Heaven Can Wait.
I haven't seen it yet, so I'm going to have to get myself out to the theater.
Well, no, it's actually a movie that's been out since 1976. Warren Beatty.
Oh, Warren Beatty.
Yeah, this one goes back a ways. I find this one
on Netflix.
Yeah, this one's it's so fascinating because it deals with a guy who, he's a football player. He's second string quarterback on the Los Angeles Rams. And that's what his goal is that he wants to be the starting quarterback for the Rams, and he ends up, dying, getting into a crash. But it was a little too soon. In other words, the angel that was looking over him pulled him out just before the crash instead of waiting for the outcome. And so it deals with that. But what was fascinating about this is that he reincarnates. They find him another body so he can continue on his goal because they realize, wait a minute, we made a mistake. You're here way before you're supposed to be. So they said, okay, we're going to see if we can help you with a goal. So they put him in another body. And what's fascinating is the trainer for the team gets to experience him as this new person now who's gone back to get his life back in that particular way, but it was only a temporary situation. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden that life was about to be expelled because its time was. And he says, wait a minute, I haven't really achieved my goal, my getting my life back. Well, this is the way it is for that. Whatever is going to happen, it's going to happen. And so then he reincarnates right into the quarterback during a game. Okay, and they end up winning the game, and of course there's the big celebration in the locker room, and of course the trainer shows up, gets there just in time, and sees that it's him again. So he gets to see him in 3 different lives.
Right.
And you got to think, because you were mentioning earlier about how we tend to, especially in America, reincarnate into groups. In other words, excuse me, familiar relationships. And I thought, well, as I was reading the chapter, especially when we were talking about, bloodlines, is, well, what about orphans?
Yeah, well, there really are no orphans. And I'll give you an example. The lady that I had yesterday, I was speaking with her biological mother, and I said, you have 2 mothers. I have a lady here started describing her, and she happened to know her biological mother. I said, this lady gave up at least 2. I said, but you've all been reunited. And she was from China. So she was a Chinese baby adopted by American parents who couldn't have children of their own. And her siblings were also adopted out, and all of this. So they had people sort of all around the world. But I have to say, with adoption, in my book, I talk about a young man who got the DNA that was required for his life. But he was adopted by a family who gave him the place to grow in love in his life. So often in the cases of orphans, things like that, there's the idea of I need a certain DNA and an experience here on this earth plane. So they will end up with various parents, foster parents, whatever that is, and then maybe adopted. But there's DNA and then there's adopted family. So there are some people who will choose to live many lives in one life, much like Warren Beatty, without necessarily having to be reincarnated, but stacking up experience one after another, more than many people might have in a lifetime.
Over the years that you have been doing this work, especially when it comes to the children that come to visit you with the messages that they want to convey to the living, the people that they've left behind, has there been a common theme about what our deepest fear is? So many people, it seems that it isn't so much that we're really afraid of death. It seems more people are more afraid of living. What has been the theme that you've experienced?
Well, what I've discovered is that once people come to terms with death, there's the opportunity to live fearlessly. So that is the biggest message from the children, is live full on out fearlessly, that you literally have nothing to lose. You can't even lose your life. You will only gain your life if you live fearlessly and with love. So that really is, if I had to sum it up, it's live fearlessly with love. Mm-hmm. Do not live your life as though there are no brakes on your vehicle. Because the kids in spirit will often talk about pushing the envelope, stretching. If someone says no, it's why. Everybody has a kid or knows a kid who does that. Mm-hmm. Well, no, this is not good for you. Why? Well, you really shouldn't do that. Why? Well, this is just the way it is. Why? So kids are always asking why, so they ask us to question and live full on out. Mm-hmm. So that's the message for everyone. Live in love and live fearlessly. That's what the kids teach us. And they're with us all along the way, whether they're miscarried, aborted, whether they were stillborn, whether they lived for a few days, whether they lived to be 5, 10, 15, 20, it doesn't matter. They are with us. Mm-hmm.
Such an encouraging book for our listeners out there to pick up is I'm Not Dead, I'm Different, especially for those who have experienced this themselves where they've lost a child, and it's, as it's said, it's a very devastating experience to have because you tend to look at what could have been, what might have been had this child lived, all these possibilities. And really when you take a look at framing it in that particular context, it's almost as though the grieving we have is the potentiality that we had as a fantasy about what we would have been like had they lived. Is that kind of how it works?
Absolutely. In the back of the book, I have some exercises to help people connect with their loved ones in the afterlife. One of these exercises is called the stage. I think that's what I called it in the book. But it's literally placing yourself in the situation through all these steps. I walk you through the meditation. But where you meet your loved ones and your children where they are, not where we wanted them to be. So allowing them as spirits to show us what they're doing, to show us how they're living, to show us where they're meeting us. And I remember I had one lady go through this meditation, and she said, oh my goodness, my daughter was a volleyball player. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's never going to win a championship. She's never going to fulfill her dreams. And she said, when we did this meditation, I saw myself involved. I'm on the sidelines cheering her, and her team was up there on the stage, and they just won a championship. So she was able to experience her daughter winning, thriving, living, and living the life that she had here and that she continues there. I had one father see his daughter having had children, not necessarily in this life, she passed before that, but he saw her having children in other lives and being married in other lives, that she had had that experience within her even before she passed in this one. So it allows us to connect with our loved ones in an expansive way, because we have two choices when we lose somebody we love. We can contract with grief, pull inward, and that really limits connection. Or we can expand into the experience, work with gratitude, not gratitude necessarily that someone has passed, but gratitude for every level of connection which comes our way and that we pursue. And it's amazing. People who expand into the experience, their children will help them change the world. That's just how it works.
You know, Hollister, thought it had occurred to me, especially for those who have lost children who, on the day they lose the child, they seem to die themselves.
Right.
And that death may go for 5, 10, 20, who knows, 30 years. Now, when that happens, do they tend to lock in the spirit where the spirit wants to move on, but until you find some closure and you kind of let me go, I'm kind of stuck here with you? Has that ever been an experience?
No, unfortunately. First of all, have you ever really tried to make a kid do anything?
No.
Okay, well, I got to tell you, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work with spirits either. So, no, we don't hold people back. We don't hold spirits back. We hold ourselves back.
Because I have read, that there's somehow a karmic entwinement, that when you're like that, you're actually holding them from moving on. And I thought, well, that seems to be something that doesn't make any sense, especially when it comes to the spirit realm.
Enmeshment is a concept we have here.
Okay.
And
one of those crazy rules we've added to how life should work.
Just don't sign on to enmeshment. They sign on to network. There's a difference. Enmeshment gives an idea of struggle, like you're stuck in a spider's web. Network equals connection. And so when the reason it seems like you're holding something back, you're really holding your own spirit back because you're not connecting with the network that's there. You're pulling yourself out of the network when that happens. And everything that the kids talk about is connection, connection, connection. Let's connect and continue living together. That's what they want to do.
Hollister, in asking this next question, I think sometimes with a lot of our listeners out there who may be bound by a strong religious belief, I may be in a little bit of trouble with this one, but I thought, why not? Because I feel and sense this theme throughout your book, and it really answered a question in a very ethereal way, and that is this. God has created man in his like image, and that is to be a creator, or a co-creator, if you will. That being said, we have been created, in other words, soul is perfect. We come into this carnation of this life here on planet Earth, and the sin is believing that we are imperfect. And you hear that so often in churches, that God is perfect, but we're not. And I'm thinking, why would God create something so imperfect?
Yeah, it's interesting. The duality, the spirits do not function in the duality of life. They recognize light, darkness, shadow, unshadow, things like that. But it's more of a balance-oriented thing. I used to be a Christian singer, and I used to write Christian songs. And one of the songs I wrote is called God of the Unexpected. And it goes like this. You are a God of the unexpected, the daily miracle kind. Forgive me for trying to contain you within the confines of my mind. I think one of the most dangerous things for us is to try to dumb down the immense wisdom of the afterlife and the spirit life into terms that we can understand here. We just can't get it. Our finite brains cannot process truly the magnificence of creation and how it all goes together. I know when I'm talking with the spirits that there's much more that they want to share with me, and they have shared a lot. However, I understand that there are some concepts that we just won't get here. So I'm willing to let it be for right now. When one very religious lady passed, her daughter came to me, and I said, your mother's telling me her last words, I'm going to die and see the face of God. And you said, Mom, go ahead, go. We're here. Go see the face of God. She goes, that's exactly what happened. My mother said, I'm going to go see the face of God, and she died. So the question was, did you see the face of God? And the answer was, I did not see the face of God, but God is everywhere.
Such a profound topic. I think it kind of takes us out of our thinking and the rules that kind of bound us to this earthly plane, and you realize there's so many possibilities that it's time to do or be what Stephen Jobs once said. He says, for the people who are crazy enough to think that they could change the world, they're the ones that usually do.
That's exactly right. And many people have called me crazy when I first started speaking to the spirits.
And I can imagine you probably looked in the mirror and thought to yourself, I'm a little nuts here,
That's
but
right.
hey, why not?
Who
made the rules?
When I took my SATs, this was not really the job description I was going for.
Now, Hollister, where is a website people can find out more about your work, maybe get a hold of you, as well as to get the book, I'm Not Dead, I'm Different?
Well, the book is available. It's published by HarperCollins. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. People can download it into Kindles and Nooks and, iPads and all that good stuff. They can reach me directly on Facebook. So, I answer the Facebook posts myself. They can also find out more information by going to HollisterRand.com, sending emails about appointments or more information to HollisterRand@gmail.com. And, I travel all over the place. So I will probably come to your city and other cities sometime soon. And I also do phone sessions as well. So we're not limited. The spirits aren't limited by distance, so we shouldn't be either.
I agree. Hollister, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. What a treat.
It was delightful. Thanks so much.
And don't forget, heaven can wait.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks again. Again, the book is I'm Not Dead, I'm Different. Our guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, Hollister Rand. We'll also have a nice bit on our website. You can find out more at www.beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We want to thank you for joining us here on the program today. I'm Daniel Davis. Remember, wherever you are is where you should be. Have a nice day.